Have you ever wondered what makes a prisoner beg for absolute secrecy before opening his mouth? Not out of fear of justice, but out of fear of what might happen if the truth escapes the walls of a cell. This is a confession from inside the jail that should never have been heard. And perhaps after today you wish you never had heard it either. He didn't want a lawyer. He didn't demand a reduced sentence. He only asked for one thing, that the camera be turned off. But even so, he spoke. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because what seemed like just another mysterious case, one of those filed with 4 names and 1 blank, has gained a new chapter. A chapter that wasn't in the records, it was on the tapes. In the woods of Hollow Creek, 5 young women disappeared between 1998 and 2002. The police found 4 bodies, all with similar marks, arranged as if someone wanted to be noticed. The 5th body never turned up, but he did, and he spoke. The 5th wasn't hers, he said. Watch this video until the end and you will get goosebumps, because this true story is still alive, even without all the bodies. And what was said in that recording is just the beginning. His name was Thomas Reed, or at least that's how he presented himself when he was arrested in 2019 during an unrelated investigation. False documents, clean records, no direct link to the victims, a ghost with a CPF. But it was inside Black Hollow State Prison that the real Thomas began to exist, not in systems but on the tapes. Calm, direct, methodical. He worked as a technical draftsman in a company that produced industrial manuals. He didn't talk in the hallways. He always ate lunch at the same time, and he organized his pencils in order of wear. He never raised his voice. He never had an outburst. But a cellmate once said, his silence seemed to scream when the lights went out. Psychologically, he was what reports call a cold operator. No empathy, no rush. When assessed, he described the human mind as a hydraulic system. With the right pressure, everything leaks, even secrets. His routine was marked by patterns, 3 daily alarms, 1 for each meal, precise notes on the weather, external noise and bodily responses. He did not kill on impulse. He killed because he understood the weather, and he used the forest as an extension of his method. But what no one yet knew was how many times he had already tested this system. Claire Whitmore had never been one to stand out, and that was exactly why he had chosen her, 22 years old. A recent nurse, she lived in Lansing, Michigan. She worked nights, went to school in the mornings, and walked alone on the trails on Sundays, always wearing the same headphones and worn-out sneakers. The trail. Hollow Creek. The same one where 4 bodies had been found between 1998 and 2002. She didn't know that, and he knew everything. He found her phone lying in a puddle after a storm. He turned it on, tested it, and opened the files. There were dozens of audio recordings of Claire, short rants, loose thoughts, to-do lists dictated in a sweet, confident voice, but there was one recording that stopped him in his tracks. Sometimes I talk to myself just to feel like someone is listening, even if they're not. That was the seal. What sealed her fate wasn't her body, it was her voice. For 4 months he had followed her footsteps unseen. He had figured out where she bought food, what music she played when she wanted to forget the day. She was predictable, methodical, constant. And to him that was permission. Randomness was noise. Claire offered structure. She wasn't the first, but it was the only one he wanted to hear until the end. The Hollow Creek Trail was known for its beauty. Red leaves in the fall, shallow streams, no cell phone reception at all. But beyond mile 4, where the vegetation began to swallow the trail, there was a turnoff. A few feet of thick woods led to a forgotten clearing. There Thomas built what he called a chamber, not a cabin, not a shelter. A structure designed to isolate, record and erase. Made of old boards and thick waterproof tarps, the interior contained only 3 items: an analog tape recorder, a flat mattress covered in clear plastic, and a yellowish light bulb hanging by a bare cord. Everything was portable, collapsible, and untraceable. The generator was buried, covered by leaves and controlled by a timer. No noise escaped, no echo returned. On the wall, There were lines marking days, not days of kidnapping, days of listening. He tested the ambient noises with cassette tape, adjusted the reverberation, measured the response time of the voice in the air. Everything was done for a single purpose, to capture the sound of giving up. Not the scream, not the call for help, but the exact moment when someone's voice gives itself away. And that's what he wanted to record with Claire. It all started with a note, handwritten, precise. Handwriting paper folded 3 times, found inside the glove compartment of Claire's car after an ordinary afternoon at the supermarket. If you want to hear your own voice, head to Hollow Creek, Sunday, 4 p.m. Bring what you haven't told anyone. She laughed. Then he trembled. Nobody knew about those recordings. No one, other than those who had heard them. Over the next few days, she tried to ignore it. But something was corroding the calm with which he used to live. On Sunday, at 3:48 p.m., she parked at the trailhead. He wore black pants, a grey sweatshirt, hair tied up, headphones around his neck. He had a pepper spray in his pocket, an indefinite fear in the throat. He was already there, since 1 p.m., watching from afar, between leaves, without making a sound. He knew her every step. He knew the hesitation at the curve of the rock, the time she stopped to take a picture of the forked tree. When she reached the clearing, she saw the cabin, and on the floor at the entrance the recorder turned on, the tape spinning in silence. She pressed play. He heard his own voice laughing, then crying, then breathing. But the final sound was different, a serious noise, as if someone was there behind her at the time of recording. And when she turned around, he was. She tried to run. She didn't scream. The sound of her own breathing seemed louder than the entire forest, but he already knew that. Every misstep, every detour, every hesitation, he had mapped it all out. When? Claire stumbled over the roots covered in wet mud. The cloth was already in his hand, soaked in chloroform, folded in 3 layers, pressed precisely over her face. It took exactly 19 seconds for the body to give way, long enough for her eyes to see him and understand. Thomas didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just held it until the last spasm, as if turning off a switch. Then he carried her to the chamber. Her feet dragged leaves. A sneaker got stuck in the mud. He didn't come back to get it. Inside the structure, Claire was positioned on the plastic mattress. Hair straightened, head slightly tilted. The tape was already prepared, a new, blank one, with a total time of 60 minutes. He pressed REC. The lamp flickered, casting vivid shadows on the walls. The second substance was injected precisely into the jugular vein. It was not lethal. It merely blocked voluntary movements, maintaining consciousness. He wanted his voice, and he tried. He tried to speak, but his mouth only trembled. The sound that came out was not a scream. It was a whisper, and he recorded every second of it. When the tape stopped, he didn't hesitate. He pressed the eject button as calmly as one might close a drawer. He removed the cartridge, wrapped it carefully in a microfiber cloth and placed it inside a black box. The tape wasn't evidence. It was a record. To him, the only truth that mattered was the kind that could be rewound and heard again. Claire was still alive when he began the cleanup. Not fully conscious, but alive enough that her heart was still beating, fighting silently. That was part of the calculation. Rigor mortis to him disrupted the symmetry of the scene. He wanted everything to be clean before the end. With cotton cloths soaked in antiseptic solution, he erased fingerprints, spills, and footprints. The mattress was carefully folded and incinerated in a metal drum 100 meters from the cabin. The syringes were broken, melted with acid, and discarded in different bins in the neighboring city. The only thing he left intact was the recorder, but no tape, just the equipment, closed, untouched, an invitation to whoever found the place. The body, it was not yet a body, it was presence, and he wanted the space to carry the feeling that something had happened there. But no one could prove it, because there was no blood, there was no mess, there was no error. There was silence, the kind of silence that is born not from the absence of sound, but from the absence of witness. He never buried Claire, he never hid or abandoned her body. Burial is an act of farewell, and Thomas did not say goodbye. He archived it. To this end, he built an underground structure a few meters from the chamber, a compartment camouflaged under a layer of leaves with an iron handle disguised as a thick root. When pulled, it revealed a hatch made of resin-treated wood, odorless and damp. Down there, the temperature was controlled. Humidity was close to zero. Preservation. Claire was laid there with the precision of an embalmer. Her body was wrapped in layers of plastic wrap, curled into a fetal position, her eyes manually closed with thumb pressure. Beside her, a white candle, unlit, and on her chest, a handwritten note. Listen to the end. There was no signature, no date, just neat handwriting, drawn like a technical chart. He returned to the site for 3 days in a row, always at night. He took small objects with him, a recording of another voice, a baby, tooth, an old tape with numerical labels. He buried these items as if he were building a time capsule, but each item was positioned not for safekeeping. It was to be found when he decided someone should find it. Thomas never believed in traces as failure. He believed in traces as script, and each element left there had a specific role. It wasn't chance. It was stage direction. When the compartment was finally sealed, he didn't look back. He just wrote down in his notebook, File 5, complete. And he disappeared into the trees as if he had never existed. 3 years later, in 2022, a child and his father were hiking along Hollow Creek, trying to escape the sweltering August heat. The boy ran ahead, off the main trail, and tripped over an iron handle that jutted out of the ground as if the forest had spat out something it would rather keep buried. The wooden lid, covered in moss and dead leaves, seemed a part of the landscape. But the sound it made when it opened, a hollow, muffled, low-pitched click, sounded like a whisper coming from underground. The smell was the first thing that alerted the father. It wasn't putrefaction. It was something between chemical and ancient. Inside the cavity was a black metal box, and on top of it was a piece of paper with the words, "Listen to the end." The police were called immediately. In less than 48 hours, the place was surrounded, searched, and photographed, but nothing made sense. There was no body. There were no signs of violence in the compartment. But there was one item that chilled the agents' spines, a sealed cassette tape labeled Mutsi 5. The sound contained there lasted 57 minutes and 43 seconds. Claire's voice was clear for the first 20. Then there were noises, breathing, tremors, almost unintelligible whispers. And then around minute 47, a second voice. Male. Calm. It needs. Describing her physical state with technical coldness, as if narrating an experiment in progress. The recording ends with a click. Not an ambient sound, but the sound of something breaking. Slowly. The material was sent to the FBI. The trail reopened. The muffled press. Officially, what they found was restricted investigation material. But for anyone who heard the tape, it wasn't a clue. It was a script, a warning, a provocation. Because Thomas never accidentally left. He drove. And that was just the beginning. When investigators brought the cassette tape into the maximum security penitentiary at Black Hollow, Thomas showed. No surprise. Sitting at the interrogation room table, handcuffed and motionless, he stared at the tape as if reunited with an old friend. One of the agents, trying to force him to give in, asked directly, "Do you want to tell us what this is?" Thomas did not answer immediately. He just closed his eyes for a few seconds. Then, in a dry voice, he said, "What you call a clue is just the echo. The real sound was made earlier." No clear admission, no denial, just calculated phrases. He knew that the content of that recording would not be enough for a new trial. He also knew that without a body, without a date, and without a signature, everything would be just guesswork. And that was what he relied on absence, on the gap between knowing and proving. In the days that followed, Thomas was isolated in an observation cell. He began to write, sheets and sheets of paper, filled with technical drawings, sound diagrams, acoustic maps of the forest, none of them useful for the investigation. None of them had names, just numbers, coordinates, symbols. The agents tried to cross-reference the information with other cases. Nothing matched. But that was what he wanted. To create connections where there might not be any. Or to make it seem like there weren't any, when in fact everything was intertwined. Thomas became the center of a web that might only exist in his mind, or might be too real to comprehend all at once. He spent his nights awake, staring at the ceiling, mumbling disjointed dates. Sometimes he repeated the names of the tapes in a low voice. Daka 2, Napa 4, Napa 5. And then it stopped, always at the same point. When an agent asked him about number 6, he smiled for the first time in weeks. And he said, "Haven't you heard the 6th yet? Then you're late." When they finally decided to pressure him, the approach changed. No accusations, no orders. Just a recorder on the table, tape spinning, and the room silent. Thomas stared at the device as if he were in front of an altar. Nobody asked anything. He has just begun. The 5th voice wasn't hers. "You still don't understand, and that fascinates me." The tone was neutral, almost didactic. "Listen again. At minute 23, there is a micro-disruption in the breathing pattern. It's not fear, it's confusion. Because she heard something else, and it wasn't me." The agents looked at each other. They replayed the tape, and there it was. A muffled sound, impossible to distinguish on first listening. But it wasn't the effect of the tape. It was another voice, a man's voice, older, closer. Thomas continued. "He came in early, he broke protocol, and when that happens, the experiment fails." They asked for names. He laughed. "You don't need his name. You need his job title." Then he handed over a yellowed envelope with a faded photo. A police officer, old uniform, a badge partially visible. On the back, Thomas's neat handwriting. He spoke at minute 47. "You just didn't want to listen." From that moment on, the narrative went up in smoke. The files were removed from the case. Visits to Thomas were suspended, and the agents who dealt directly with him were transferred. But the final sentence, before the recording was abruptly interrupted by the prison administration, was recorded, "If I tell you what happened in that minute, you won't leave this room alive." For months, tape number 5 was analyzed, converted to digital, passed through filters, equalizers, spectrograms. The goal was to identify the second voice, the sound Thomas claimed was not his. Forensic analysis isolated vocal patterns, and the results not only confirmed a new frequency, but identified something even more disturbing. The noise of a two-way radio in the background, brief pops, a barely audible change, followed by a whispered phrase, "I've got her." That sentence changed everything. The name of the officer in the photo? It has not been officially released, but an investigative reporter in 2023 linked the face to retired Sergeant James R. Holbrook, one of the first to respond to the Hollow Creek cases in 1999. Holbrook died in 2006, officially of a heart attack. Unofficially, there is a complaint about internal manipulation of the scene. Shelved. No investigation. Thomas knew. He knew from the beginning. And his true purpose was never just to record the agony. It was to expose the pattern, to show that the bodies were not just victims. They were responses. Each tape was a denunciation disguised as a ritual. Each silence, a critique of a mission. Claire was last because Claire shouldn't have existed. Her recording breaks the cycle. It exposes the link that links disappearances to the system itself. Thomas wasn't just the killer. He was the teller of the story that no one wanted to hear. And now there was a new tape, tagged number 6, found days later in an abandoned closet at the school where Holbrook taught after retiring. The tape was intact, never played, and in it, a childish voice. Thomas wrote in a separate note, "Their mistake was thinking I was making it up. Their biggest mistake was listening to me too late." Tape number 6 starts off differently than the others. No breath, no environment, no hesitation. A boy's voice between 7 and 9 years old speaks directly into the microphone. "He said that if I told him my mother wouldn't come back." The phrase is repeated 3 times. Then silence. Forensic analysis confirms it is not manipulation. The audio is real, continuous, without cuts. The background sound suggests a school environment. Desks shuffling, a bell in the distance, muffled children's voices. And in minute 12, something unexpected. Holbrook's voice. He doesn't order, don't threaten, just instruct, with the calm of someone who has done it before. Now you just tell me what I said, understand? The boy answers yes. The tape continues for another 38 minutes with pauses, restrained crying, and a whispered name at the end, Claire. The recording was forwarded to the FBI, but did not enter public records. Officially, Thomas Reed died a week later. Cause of death, cardiorespiratory arrest, alone in the cell, no signs of struggle. But the internal report mentions a single sentence scrawled on the wall in dried blood. There's still tape 7. She was never found. But with each new audio release, more questions arise. Who were the others involved? Why does Claire's voice appear on a child's tape? And how many tapes still exist? Thomas left no answers. He left trails. Trails that do not lead to the end of the story, but to the beginning of something much bigger. If this story made you hear silence in a different way, leave a like. Comment there. Some voices never go away. And in the next episode, you'll hear what was said at minute 47, but this time with the real name of the person in the room.